The honest story that my dad tells me, when I was 11 years old, he took me to Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, which was the mecca of hockey at the time. And I met Foster Hewitt and Ward Cornell, who did Hockey Night in Canada. And as an 11-year-old boy, I loved sports and got to see them announce. This is back in the 60s. So it was pretty cool to be behind the scenes. So my love of sports and seeing those guys, my dad said it triggered something in me. So that was what I always wanted to be, was either a disc jockey or a sports broadcaster, and I've done both. But I loved high school sports when I was a kid. I wasn't a good athlete, but I tried high school football, and I loved that atmosphere. And I thought, this is the big time. So I think that was the seed that was planted in me, that when I go and do a high school story in Calgary, I want to put those guys on TV and make it an even bigger time for them, because I remember what it was like. So I've always thought of that I want to make your story from your high school, your team, the big story of the day. I want you to feel important because what you do is important. I think that's where it started. Going to small town radio and TV stations in Ontario, I would cover local sports and put that on the air, and people talked about it. So I thought it was just smart broadcasting too, that if I like it and people wanted to hear their names, because they weren't going to hear it on the networks, it was just smart broadcasting, and I enjoyed making people who they would consider small people in their little sport seem big. He was at the end of his career, but what I learned from him, not just broadcasting, but as a person, what a nice man he was. When we would go on the road and get into an airplane, I vividly remember Ed working the plane, saying hi. You know, I tend to put the headset on and just kind of bury my head in a book, where Ed was very personable. So I saw a man who was good at broadcasting, but a very good person with those around him, in the community especially. So I learned a lot about community and giving back as a broadcaster from Ed. And I think the '88 Winter Games put Calgary on the map in the world and made Calgarians feel like we are worthy, if you will, that we deserve recognition as a cool city, not just a stampede city where there's cowboys and a stampede every year. So I would have to say the Winter Olympics is number one. I could give you a whole bunch more, but I think that's right up there for a lot of reasons. It made Calgary a volunteer city. Now it's arguably one of the best in Canada for getting volunteers. Why? Because of the legacy of the Calgary Olympics. Let's say Vancouver.
Yes.
I think Vancouver was was a residual effect of volunteers that happened in Calgary. When you see it in reality, it impacts you more. And even though I'm a broadcaster, I kind of feel a little bit guilty that I haven't won Stanley Cups or gold medals or won world championships. I've been a sports broadcaster. I've told their stories. But maybe if some of those amateur athletes, if their stories weren't told, their life wouldn't have been as good. So maybe I have impacted them. So now that I just stopped to think about it, being in this Hall of Fame is pretty darn cool. Something that I'll treasure for the rest of my life.